Wedding revenge story. Have you ever experienced a complete disaster on what should have been the happiest day of your life? Or how would you feel when you saw your loved ones humiliate you during your most important moment? What you're about to hear will shock you. Are you ready? Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. My name is Linda Morrison. I'm 58 years old, and I want to tell you the story of what happened to me in Phoenix, Arizona. This story tells about what happened to me at my son's wedding and how I got perfect revenge afterward. Let me tell you, it was an ending no one expected, and the secrets that came out shocked everyone. After losing my husband Robert to cancer, the only meaningful thing in my life was my son David's happiness. When David came to me and said, "Mom, I'm marrying Jessica. I couldn't have achieved anything without you." My eyes filled with tears. This wedding would be a new beginning for me too. When I first met Jessica, I thought she was beautiful and intelligent. But something felt off about her family. Her mother Patricia seemed overly controlling and had this calculating look in her eyes. She would ask pointed questions about my finances, about Robert's insurance policy, about the house we owned. These questions made me uncomfortable, but David was so happy, so I stayed quiet. I spared no expense for David's wedding. I decided to spend all of the $180, zero insurance money from Robert on this wedding, money that was supposed to be my security for retirement. I rented the prestigious Fairmont Resort in Scottsdale, organized a lavish reception for 300 people, and made every single detail that Jessica dreamed of come true. I paid $25, zero to the elite florist for imported orchids and white roses. The catering cost me $40,000. We chose lobster, filet mignon, and the finest champagnes. Jessica's wedding dress alone cost $8,000, a handcrafted masterpiece with Italian lace. This wedding was my final, most precious gift to my son. During the wedding preparations, Jessica's behavior became increasingly strange. "Linda, you're interfering too much," she would snap at me. "This is our wedding. You just write the checks. That's enough." Patricia constantly inserted herself into every decision. "I'm more experienced than you, Linda. Let me handle the important details," she would say, then proceed to change arrangements I had already approved and paid for. What I didn't know at the time was that Jessica and Patricia had been systematically excluding me from every meaningful decision while taking credit for my financial contributions. They had created a separate WhatsApp group with all the vendors, coordinators, and even David, where they discussed their wedding plans. I discovered this weeks later when the florist accidentally sent me a screenshot meant for Patricia, showing messages where Jessica called me the old bat who just signs checks, and Patricia referred to me as David's annoying mother who thinks she's in charge. The psychological manipulation had started months before the wedding. Jessica would schedule vendor meetings during my work hours, claiming it was the only time everyone could meet. When I managed to attend, she would arrive with a completely different agenda than what we had discussed, making me look confused and out of touch in front of the professionals I was paying. She had convinced David that I was becoming controlling and difficult to work with during my grief process. But the most painful betrayal came 3 weeks before the wedding. I had planned a special mother-son moment, a private dinner where I would give David Roberts' gold watch, a family heirloom passed down through 3 generations. When I arrived at the restaurant, I found Jessica sitting at our reserved table with a smug smile. "Oh, Linda," she said with fake sweetness, "David had to cancel. He's having a bachelor party planning session with my cousins. He asked me to tell you that he's too busy with wedding preparations to do individual family dinners. He said you'd understand." I sat across from this woman who was systematically isolating my son from me, holding my late husband's watch in a velvet box that would remain unopened. That night, I called David directly. His phone went straight to voicemail. The next morning, he texted me, "Sorry, Mom, wedding stress is crazy. Let's catch up after the honeymoon." 2 weeks before the ceremony, I received a call that made my blood run cold. It was from the wedding photographer I had personally hired and paid $5,000 for a premium package. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, "I just wanted to confirm the change in your package. The bride's mother called and said you wanted to downgrade to the basic package to save money. She said you're having financial difficulties." I was speechless. "I never requested any changes." "Oh," he said, sounding confused. "Well, Patricia Williams has been handling all communications about your son's wedding. She told me you were embarrassed about overspending and asked her to manage things more carefully. From now on." This is when I realized the full scope of their manipulation. They weren't just taking credit for my money. They were rewriting the entire narrative to make me look like a financially irresponsible burden who needed Patricia's superior management skills to keep things under control. I immediately called the venue coordinator, the florist, and the caterer. The story was the same everywhere. Patricia had contacted each vendor, claiming she was helping me manage my finances, and that I had asked her to take over communications to reduce my stress. She had positioned herself as the responsible adult cleaning up my emotional overspending. The manipulation reached its peak when I attended what I thought was a final dress fitting with Jessica. She had specifically asked me to come, saying she wanted my opinion on final alterations. When I arrived at the boutique, I discovered it was actually a surprise bridal shower that Jessica's friends had organized. But here's the cruel twist. I wasn't invited as a guest. I was there as the person paying for the champagne and catering for everyone else. Jessica's maid of honor, Amanda, pulled me aside and said, "It's so generous of you to sponsor Jessica's shower. Patricia told us how you insisted on paying for everything even though Jessica felt bad asking. She said you're trying to make up for not being more involved in the wedding planning." I stood there, watching Jessica open gifts from her real friends and family, while I was relegated to the role of a guilt-ridden ATM trying to buy my way into my own son's wedding festivities. The guests treated me with polite distance, clearly having been told some version of a story where I was the overbearing mother-in-law who was trying too hard to insert herself into Jessica's special day. That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. I hired a private investigator named Marcus Rodriguez. Something about Jessica's perfectly crafted story felt too rehearsed, too convenient. Marcus was expensive, $2,000 for a comprehensive background check. But I needed to know the truth. While Marcus worked on his investigation, the wedding preparations continued their devastating course. David became increasingly distant, responding to my calls with short, clipped answers. "Mom, Jessica says you've been very stressed lately. Maybe you should talk to someone about grief counseling. We just want you to be happy." The cruelest irony was that everyone around me had been convinced I was the problem. Robert's sister Margaret called me 2 days before the wedding. "Linda, honey, Patricia called me. She's concerned about you. She said you've been acting erratic and making unreasonable demands about the wedding. Are you taking care of yourself?" Even my own family had been turned against me by Jessica and Patricia's carefully constructed narrative. They had painted me as a grief-stricken widow who was projecting my loneliness onto David's wedding, creating drama where none existed. On the wedding morning, I spent hours preparing myself. I wore my navy blue silk dress, the one Robert had loved on me. Looking in the mirror, I whispered to myself, "Today will be the day David is most proud of me." But when I arrived at the resort, the first devastating shock was waiting for me. The wedding coordinator looked at me blankly when I introduced myself. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Morrison, but there's no VIP seating reservation under your name," she said. "There must be a mistake," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm the groom's mother. I paid for this entire wedding." She checked again, then looked up with barely concealed annoyance. "Oh, here you are. Table 47. It's in the back section, near the service entrance." My heart stopped. Table 47. I had invested my entire life savings into this wedding, and they were seating me at table 47. In the back corner next to the kitchen, meanwhile, I could see Jessica's family being escorted to the prime front tables. When I reached my assigned table, the humiliation deepened. I was completely alone. The table was wedged between the kitchen doors and a storage closet, where the constant noise made it nearly impossible to hear the ceremony. Other tables were beautifully decorated, but mine looked like an afterthought. A folding table with a paper tablecloth. But then I noticed something that made my situation even more devastating. At the table next to me sat Robert's elderly cousin Frank, who was 89 years old and suffered from dementia. He looked confused and kept asking his caregiver, "Where are we? Is this a restaurant?" They had seated the groom's mother with the guest, who needed special care, hidden away from the actual celebration. When the ceremony began, I experienced an even bigger shock that cut through my heart like a knife. The officiant spoke eloquently about love and family support. Then he said words that made my blood run cold. "We want to especially thank the bride's family for making this beautiful wedding possible. Patricia Williams has shown extraordinary generosity and devotion. Without her financial support and tireless planning, this magnificent celebration would not exist." The entire crowd erupted in applause. Patricia stood up gracefully, soaking up the praise that rightfully belonged to me. I sat frozen in my corner, feeling invisible and completely erased from my own son's wedding day. But the real devastation came during the reception speeches. David took the microphone. "I want to thank everyone who made this day possible," he began. "Most especially, I want to thank Jessica's family for their incredible generosity. Patricia, you've been like a second mother to me. Your financial support, your guidance, your love, none of this would have been possible without you." The crowd cheered again. How could my own son stand there, and give credit to another woman for sacrifices I had made, for money I had spent. Then Jessica took the microphone. Patricia isn't just my mother-in-law now. She's been my real mother throughout this entire process. She handled every detail, paid for every expense. A real mother's love is shown through actions, not words, and Patricia has proven her love through her incredible generosity. At that moment, I saw Jessica catch David's eye, and they shared a look, a conspiratorial glance that told me everything. They both knew exactly what they were doing. They were stealing credit for my sacrifice, my money, my love, and doing it deliberately. The final insult came during the father-daughter dance. Since Jessica's father had died years earlier, Patricia had arranged for David to dance with her. Instead of the traditional mother-son dance with me, I watched from my corner table as my son danced with the woman who had stolen my role, my credit, and apparently my relationship with him. That night, when I returned home, I sat in Robert's old chair and pulled out photo albums, pictures of David as a baby, his graduations, his achievements. I had sacrificed everything for this child. After Robert died, I became both parents to him. I worked double shifts to pay for his education, went without new clothes and vacations. So, David could have everything he needed. And now, he was rejecting me in the most public, humiliating way possible, making me invisible at his own wedding while giving credit for my sacrifices to strangers. But as I sat there in the darkness, a plan began to form in my mind. A dark, calculated, and absolutely perfect plan. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Marcus, the private investigator. Mrs. Morrison, he said, his voice grim. You need to sit down. What I found about Jessica Williams is going to shock you. I'm listening. Her real name is Jessica Martinez. She's been married 3 times before. Not twice. The first marriage was to a 67-year-old retired executive in Miami. She got $75,000 in a divorce. The second was to a tech entrepreneur in Seattle, $150,000. The third was to a real estate developer in Denver, $200,000. Each marriage lasted exactly 18 months. She has this down to a science. My hands were shaking as I absorbed this information. But Mrs. Morrison, there's more. Patricia isn't her mother. Patricia is her business partner. Her real name is Patricia Santos, and she has a criminal record for fraud and identity theft in 3 states. They've been running this marriage scam for over a decade. The next morning, I drove straight to First National Bank, where I had been a customer for over 20 years. I requested to meet with the branch manager, Mrs. Chen. I need to reverse all the wedding payments I made. I said firmly, every single transaction from the past 3 months. That's a very large amount, Mrs. Morrison. Are you certain about this? I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Those payments were made under fraudulent circumstances. From the bank, I drove to David and Jessica's new house. They were on their honeymoon in Hawaii, and I still had the spare key inside their home. I systematically collected every single wedding gift and stored them away. But the real treasure was waiting in David's old bedroom. While packing his belongings, I discovered a filing cabinet that wasn't locked. Inside, I found documents that made my hands shake with shock and rage. Jessica's real identity documents were there, including marriage certificates from not one, but two previous marriages. The first certificate showed she had been married to a wealthy businessman in 2018, receiving $200,000 in alimony. The second marriage was to a tech executive in 2020, from whom she had gotten another $150,000. But the most shocking discovery was her real birth certificate. Jessica had told David she was 28 years old. According to the official document, she was actually 35, 7 years older than she claimed. Jessica was a professional con artist. She had researched David, learned about Robert's death and the insurance money, and systematically planned to marry him and drain our resources. Patricia wasn't just her mother, she was her accomplice. 2 days later, David's panicked voice came through my phone. "Mom, something terrible has happened." The credit card company called and said all the wedding payments have been reversed. The resort is demanding $180,000 immediately. "How interesting," I said calmly, sipping my morning coffee. "Mom, this has to be some kind of mistake. Can you call the bank and fix this?" "David," I said, my voice turning ice cold, "that money was my money, my retirement fund, and I have decided not to pay for a wedding where I was treated like garbage." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I spent $180,000 on your wedding, and you seated me at table 47 next to the kitchen, while giving Jessica's family all the credit for my generosity." "But Mom, I'm not finished, David. I also discovered some very interesting information about your wife. Did you know that Jessica has been married twice before? Did you know she's 35, not 28? Did you know she collected $350,000 in divorce settlements from her previous husbands?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, David whispered, "That's impossible." "I have copies of all the documents, David. Your wife is a professional con artist, and you're her third victim." When David returned from his ruined honeymoon, he came to my house looking like he had aged 10 years. "Mom," he said, "I confronted Jessica with the documents you found." She broke down and confessed. She admitted that she and Patricia had been running this scam for years. They target widowed men or men with wealthy mothers. Jessica told me she never loved me. She loved Robert's insurance money. David lost his job due to the legal stress and had to sell his house to pay the debts from the wedding vendors who sued him. He moved into a small studio apartment and took a job at a grocery store. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. 6 months later, David appeared at my door looking different. There was something new in his eyes: humility, wisdom, genuine remorse. "Mom," he said, "I've spent every day of the last 6 months thinking about what I did to you. I took your love for granted. I know now that Jessica and Patricia specifically targeted us because they knew you loved me so much that you would give everything for my happiness." David pulled out a small envelope. "I've been working double shifts at the grocery store and doing delivery driving at night. I know I can never repay the $180,000 you lost, but this is a start." He handed me a check for $2,000. "It's the first installment. I'm going to pay you back every penny, even if it takes me the rest of my life." That's when I knew my son had truly changed. Today, 2 years later, David is engaged to Sarah, an elementary school teacher who loves him for who he is, not what he can provide. She insisted on meeting me before accepting his proposal, and she genuinely wants me to be part of their wedding planning from day one. David has paid me back $15,000 so far and refuses to let me tell him to stop. Jessica and Patricia were eventually arrested in Miami for running the same scam on another family. They're both in prison now. I testified at their trial via video conference, and seeing them in orange jumpsuits gave me more satisfaction than I expected. Sometimes in life, you have to teach people, even people you love, that your kindness is not weakness, your generosity is not unlimited, and your love must be earned through respect. I lost $180,000 that day, but I got my son back, and that, ultimately, was worth any price. So what would you have done if you were in my shoes? If your family humiliated you like this, would you have stayed silent? Or would you have fought back, like I did? And was what I did too harsh? Or was it exactly what manipulators like Jessica and Patricia deserved?